EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, January 11th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ussama Makdisi, professor of history at UC Berkeley, will be with us to talk about the West's relationship with Israel, as well as the ICJ genocide case. And later in the show, Rune Moller Stahl will be with us to talk about Nordic unions taking on Tesla. Meanwhile, South Africa's ICJ genocide case against Israel began today with powerful opening statements. An Israeli drone reportedly killed 6 in a strike on an ambulance in central Gaza yesterday. The death toll is at least 23,000, over 30,000 when you count presumed dead. 4% of Gaza's population, 90,000, are either dead, missing, or maimed. The UN Security Council unanimously votes to demand Houthis stop attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea. You're screwing up the economy, buddy. That same Security Council that vetoed the ceasefire. Priorities.
The Houthis are collectively punishing our shipping.
Our pocketbooks. The UAW moves to unionize Mercedes' Alabama plant. Exciting news. A bipartisan group of senators demand answers from Amazon on their union busting efforts with delivery drivers. Chris Christie's dropped out of the presidential race. Light a candle for your Lincoln Project loving dad. Republican governors in 15 states reject free federal money for summer food assistance for kids. Amid record housing insecurity, 5 million Americans face a rental assistance cliff in 9 days unless Congress comes to a budget deal. But Republican lawmakers have their hands full, folks. They moved to impeach Homeland Security head Mayorkas for the border.
The open border.
Yeah,
he's definitely doing.
That open border. What's his last name? He's probably in cahoots. Also, they're referring Hunter Biden for contempt because he wanted to testify in public and not behind closed doors, like Republicans wanted. Ecuador declares a state of emergency amid a surge in cartel violence. Ohio's Republican House overrides Governor Mike DeWine's veto. He's a Republican too. Meaning a ban on trans care for minors and a ban on trans athletes in sports in school will take effect. And lastly, a study finds that the noticeable drop in snow levels in the Northeast is, shocker, due to climate change. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an EmMajority Report Thursday, and I am here with my friend Matt Leck, just the two of us for right now.
Howdy.
Howdy. We were up late last night having a great old time covering the...
More fun than you should be able to have.
Oh my God.
Rick DeSantis.
Rick DeSantis.
Whatever that guy's name is.
Who even cares anymore?
And Ricky Haley.
Yeah, they went at it. It was kind of fun, and it was a bit of an afterthought, I think, for a lot of Republicans, because Trump did his favorite thing to, counter-programming on a different network. He did a town hall where he talked about things like abortion and whether or not he'll be a dictator. We will get into that later in the program, but I wanted to open the show with the most important story, obviously, in the news today, which is South Africa's genocide case against Israel. It started today. There are few hours ahead, so the preliminary hearings did wrap up. It's the first of 2 days of these hearings. Now, the actual case of genocide in the International Court of Justice, also known as The Hague, will take years, most experts say. But what this hopefully can do in the next few weeks, if they do come to the conclusion that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians, they'll be able to essentially pressure the United States, pressure Israel to cease this, and kind of institute a sort of injunction for a ceasefire. It's not as binding as it should be. International law should be much more enforceable.
It's going to be quite a test for international law.
Certainly. I mean, we're already seeing how toothless it can be. But if they do end up ruling in the way that I think they should, saying that Israel is in violation and is of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention, then the amount of pressure placed on the U.S. in particular and Biden will be immense. The court has 15 judges on it. They heard oral arguments today, and we will play a portion of that in a bit. But this was the night before Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to do a little bit of rewriting of history, and I want to point out that he does this in English, and you should always pay attention to when Israeli officials are speaking in English versus what they're saying in Hebrew, because this is public relations. This is for America. This is for manipulating the public and, putting pressure on the judges in the court here not to rule that he is committing genocide, obviously. So this is what he had to say, just straight up lying, of course, ahead of the hearings.
I want to make a few points absolutely clear. Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population. Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population. And we are doing so in full compliance with international law. The IDF is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas is doing its utmost to maximize them by using Palestinian civilians as human shields. The IDF urges Palestinian civilians to leave war zones by disseminating leaflets, making phone calls, providing safe passage corridors.
Remove themselves.
While Hamas prevents Palestinians from leaving at gunpoint, and often with gunfire. Our goal is to rid Gaza of Hamas terrorists and free our hostages. Once this is achieved, Gaza can be demilitarized and de-radicalized, thereby creating a possibility for a better future for Israel and Palestinians alike.
Yes, as he and his people in his government talk about that they will not move forward with a two-state solution. These are obvious lies. They disseminated leaflets for people in the open-air prison to leave the prison. Just leave the open-air prison while we destroy your home and everything you've known dear. If you're disabled, if you're pregnant, if you're older, if you're a child. I mean, that's impossible, but we're going to do so anyway and pretend that it's humanitarian. This is an obvious lie. This was just from a week ago in the Times of Israel. And again, Times of Israel is not a left-wing paper. Like, Haaretz is more center-left. Times of Israel, in the context of Israeli society, is center-right. And they're doing better reporting on what the Israeli government is doing than Western outlets, okay? Israel's in talks with Congo and other countries on Gaza voluntary migration plan is what this article is headlined. The voluntary resettlement of Palestinians from Gaza is slowly becoming a key official policy of the government, with a senior official saying that Israel has held talks with several countries for their potential absorption. And the quote here from Netanyahu, just mere weeks before he lies about this in public, saying, last Monday, Netanyahu told a Likud faction meeting that he is working to facilitate the voluntary migration of Gazans to other countries. Our problem is finding countries that are willing to absorb Gazans, and we are working on it, he said, which is in direct contradiction to everything he just said there, let alone what we know Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right Israeli minister, has said, saying that it's the, quote, order of the hour to expel Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, to ethnically cleanse them.
I mean, it's such an insult to everyone's intelligence, because Ben-Gvir is like, yeah, well, sorry, Blinken, don't tell us not to do that. And actually, Blinken, like a month or so ago, was flying around actually trying to facilitate exactly this.
Yes.
Like trying to get Arab countries to take in these people.
Right. Facilitating an ethnic cleansing, which outside of the genocide is a war crime. And Evan Hill of the Washington Post forensics team, who's done awesome reporting, I should say, when I criticize some of the Western coverage. It's more about cable news. Like, there have been some really, really good reporters at the Post and even at the New York Times as well. But Evan Hill in particular, because he's a forensics reporter, has looked into the claims, the craters made by Israeli bombs, and has just done a great job of dismantling the lies of the Israeli government. He pointed out on Twitter, like, the idea that has Netanyahu implemented a forced displacement or has he not is completely divorced from the reality in which, like, the displacement already happens when they've made Gaza completely uninhabitable by destroying every part of the strip of this small piece of land that was so densely populated. So now that we have the lies from Netanyahu, these are two portions of the opening statements by lawyers presenting South Africa's case of genocide against Israel. This is Adila Hassim, one of the lawyers here, speaking in particular about the indiscriminate bombings on civilian areas and how Israel has violated, in this instance, Article 2 of the Genocide Conventions. And here she goes.
In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times, it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available. They are dropped by lethal fighter jets that are used to strike targets on the ground by one of the world's most resourced armies. Israel has killed an unparalleled and unprecedented number of civilians, with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take.
That's absolutely accurate. We know in one breath, we'll hear about how Israel is the most advanced military in the world, how its army is so profoundly sophisticated. And then in the other, look, I mean, they're using them as human shields. So we got to bomb the hell out of them. Again, another trope we'll return to is the look what you made me do argument is the right-wing construction. And that is the entire case being presented by the Israeli government, which is that Hamas is so horrific and they're using them as human shields, so we had no choice to slaughter what is estimated by Euromed Monitor to be over 30,000 Palestinians, including the presumed dead, in 90 days.
Yeah, it's like in Vietnam, there's a famous quote from a general saying, it came to a point where we had to destroy the village in order to save it.
Well, and in that, I saw you posted that. That's always applicable, and certainly here. This was another clip I just wanted to play because this is, it's in Gaelic, and I'm going to butcher it. I apologize. Blaen ní Gralia. That's definitely not what it is. But, you know, the Irish people have a historic solidarity with the Palestinian people because they were also victims of bloody British colonialism, also victims of collective punishment and starvation because of the British government's imposed potato famine, and all of the mass migration that forced, the pain, the suffering, the starvation, the death of the Irish people to benefit wealthy landowners in Britain that wanted to force Irish people off of their land. So that is part of the history here. And this is an Irish lawyer here speaking and giving closing statements today in the ICJ.
It is becoming ever clearer that huge swathes of Gaza, entire towns, villages, refugee camps are being wiped from the map. As you have heard, but it bears repeating, according to the World Food Programme, 4 out of 5 people in the world in famine or a catastrophic type of hunger are in Gaza right now. Indeed, experts warn that deaths from starvation and disease risk significantly outstripping deaths from bombings. The daily statistics stand as clear evidence of the urgency and of the irreparable prejudice. On the basis of the current figures, on average, 247 Palestinians are being killed and are at risk of being killed each day, many of them literally blown to pieces. They include 48 mothers each day, 2 every hour, and over 117 children each day, leading UNICEF to call Israel's actions a war on children. Entire multi-generational families will be obliterated, and yet more Palestinian children will become WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family, the terrible new acronym born out of Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinian population in Gaza.
Very, very powerfully done. As the context of her commentary, or not commentary, the legal case she's presenting about famine, given her being Irish, is key. Again, the historical significance of South Africa bringing this case. The fact that apartheid South Africa was closely aligned with the fairly new state of Israel, despite the white Afrikaners leading the government at the time being sympathetic to Nazis, like literally in the 70s. I'm blanking on the South African Prime Minister's name, but it's quite well documented that he was explicitly anti-Semitic and sympathetic to the Nazi government. And then that change of when the ANC took over and the solidarity with Palestinians being so intrinsic and obviously deeply historical and a part of a collective understanding of people who are victims of colonization, Black South Africans who were victims of apartheid, just being like, no, we see what this is. And to see, there were other, South African lawyers who spoke, to see an Irish lawyer make this case, to see these legal minds and representatives from other countries that know this pain so deeply and bringing that context to the genocide case and coming together to make this argument in front of the of these judges at The Hague. It's a beautiful display of solidarity, and in my opinion, based on what I've read of the case, it's fairly open and shut. We'll see how it plays out. Obviously, there's immense international pressure that has in the past been exerted by the United States, Israel, and the UK. We, of course, have to make sure that these proceedings move forward without any kind of prejudice and pressure. But it is historic. It's a historic moment, and I'm thankful for all of these human rights lawyers who understand this moment right now. All right, folks, going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be speaking with Ussama Makdisi, host of the Makdisi Street podcast and professor of history at UC Berkeley. Be right back. We are back. We are back, folks, and we are joined now by Ussama Makdisi, host of the podcast Makdisi Street, professor of history and chancellor's chair at the University of California, Berkeley, author of books, including his most recent one, Age of Coexistence, the Ecumenical Frame. Gosh, I don't know if I pronounced
Ecumenical.
that right. Ecumenical Frame and the Making of the Modern Arab World. Clearly you're smarter than me. You know how to pronounce big words. Ussama, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So as a professor, obviously a historian who's dedicated, your career to studying the Arab world, this region, we opened the show talking about the ICJ South Africa genocide case, but I'm hoping we can give people even more historical context on how we got to this moment. And you wrote an excellent piece in Jacobin as well about how the Western relationship with Zionism is rooted in this deep racism towards the Middle East and towards Arab people in general. Why do you think that's so important for people to understand as we're in this, horrific historical moment for the Palestinian people?
Well, I mean, the most obvious point, of course, is that Zionism emerged in Europe in the 19th century, and it's what's most obvious to historians of the Middle East, to Palestinians, to Arabs, to anyone who knows the history of this region, is that Zionism emerged in Europe in response to European anti-Semitism, in response to European racism and nationalism. And it adopted a European solution, which is colonialism in Palestine, to create a Jewish state in a multi-religious land. And despite the wishes of a multi-religious people, the Palestinians. And so that this whole idea of Zionism emerging in the 19th century Europe, led by European Zionists, European Jewish Zionists, imposed on the Palestinians with the support of the liberal West, as well as of the Christian Zionist West, has done enormous damage. And it was the most obvious thing is that it's a European problem, a European movement that seeks a solution at the expense of non-Europeans. I mean, it's as blatant and as clear as that for anyone who studies the historical record. And of course, it was at the expense also of Arab and Eastern Jews as well, because of course they were not Zionists initially. Because again, Zionism comes from Europe. So I think that's the quick answer.
We've highlighted Avi Shlaim's work here on this program and his perspective as an Arab Jewish person and what that shift was like in kind of experiencing the nationalism coming from Zionism once he moved to Israel. And I think, it's not a radical idea that groups that have experienced deep trauma and marginalization, and in the case of Jews in Europe, the Holocaust, one of the worst crimes in human history, it's not a radical idea that certain groups that are marginalized can also hold racist notions of other groups. And yet I think, the Western construction of Israel in the way it's discussed is that it's reparations for the Holocaust, but it's at the expense of another marginalized group.
Yeah, 100%. And that was obvious at the time. And that was pointed out, of course, by Palestinians and by Arabs and in fact, by many people around the world who understood perfectly well even before the Holocaust. It's important to point out that Zionism emerged long before the Holocaust in the 19th century. And Zionist leaders, whether it's Weizmann or later on Ben-Gurion or any of the Israeli leaders, most of whom were born, of course, in Europe and who ended up in Palestine, had, of course, extraordinarily racist and demeaning views of the Arabs, of Muslims, of Eastern Jews as well. It's important to point that out. And the whole argument of atoning for Western anti-Semitism, and then, of course, the horrors of the Holocaust at the expense of the Palestinians was pointed out by Palestinians as profoundly unjust. If Europeans and Germans in particular want to atone for the Holocaust, well, then atone for the Holocaust at the expense of Germany, not at the expense of Palestinians.
Right.
And this was pointed out in 1938, in fact. I mean, even before the Holocaust, after When it was clear that there was German Nazi anti-Semitism, when it was clear there was anti-Jewish racism and anti-Semitism in Europe. And an Arab historian by the name of George Antonius, whom I talk about in the book, Age of Coexistence, points this out. And he said it's completely outrageous. What's happening to Jews in Europe is outrageous. But it's absolutely outrageous to amend for their persecution at the expense of another people. That is the ultimate form of hypocrisy. I'm paraphrasing. But that's been the Western sort of position all the way until today. I mean, the scandal of Western liberal atonement for the Holocaust is that it's always done at the expense of the Palestinians. And that really is the great scandal.
It is, certainly. And it's quite in keeping with other kind of surface level attempts at reparations for the crimes of Western powers, whether it be colonialism, and whether it be chattel slavery. We've documented on this program how Haiti was forced to pay reparations, not to the enslaved Black people, but to the slave owners for their loss of capital, essentially. And the problem with Western powers dictating the terms of reparations when they are the perpetrators of the violence themselves is that they create systems that never really hold themselves to account, and we're seeing kind of like that clear that's so clearly right now in the 75 years of displacement of Palestinians, and now of course the crimes of genocide that Israel is committing.
Yeah, and also just a refusal to acknowledge and a refusal, the culture of denialism around what happened in 1948 to the Palestinians, the whole denialism around the question of, well, Palestine was a multi-religious place where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together for centuries and centuries, and then it was a European idea to create an ethno-religious nationalist state, a Jewish state in Palestine, directly at the expense and in flagrant sort of violation of the wishes of the native population. All this history is sort of very obvious. The history is overwhelming, and what's amazing as a scholar, as a historian, and even as a layperson, the evidence is overwhelming. The archives are fairly accessible, and it's amazing how little attention there is to this sort of blatant imposition of an ethno-religious nationalist state in a multi-religious area, and the damage that's been done ever since. And we see it all the way till today, of course, what's going on in Gaza. And the horrors in Gaza are extraordinary. And the Western, I mean, honestly, Emma, the Western sort of states' reaction to the last 3 months of genocidal violence against Palestinians, irrespective of where one stands on this conflict, the idea of over 10,000 Palestinian children killed before our eyes, live streamed on social media, it's shocking. Honestly, it's shocking. It's so unconscionable. And yet you have Western states, Western liberal institutions, universities, and so on that have taken no position on this or have taken a hostile position towards Palestinians. It's really quite shocking.
I mean, for me, and I'm restating a lot of what I've said before here on the show, but it is this redefinition of anti-Semitism in the West as not of one that is of hatred of Jews or holding racist attitudes and bigoted attitudes towards Jewish people, but one of that is in opposition to Western power or
to the state of Israel.
Right, exactly, or to the state of Israel, but by extension, right, like kind of. Last night in the debate, Nikki Haley described Israel as a bright spot in the region. And I feel like she could amend it and say it's a bit of a white spot because, I think maybe some people have a difficult time really conceiving of Israel as an extension of Western white supremacy in that way because of the victimization of Jewish people by a fascist white supremacist Nazi government in and of itself. It's a delicate topic, but I'm wondering if you could expand on that idea.
On the idea of being the victims of the victims, you mean, or which one? Well,
the idea of it being kind of a state, an extension of whiteness to a degree, and white and Western whiteness, even. and how that notion is ever changing, I guess, and it's fluid, but that in practice, at least for me, and you can assess my opinion on this and give your thoughts, but that feels to me like a part of the conversation that is difficult to have.
Well, I think what it is, of course, is it's in a continuation of Western settler colonialism is really what it is, and racial theories. I mean, there is a lot of complication, obviously, because as you said, we're talking about sort of, there is a history of anti-Semitism and there is a reality of anti-Semitism in the West in particular. And what's shocking, of course, in the redefinition of anti-Semitism that you're alluding to, I mean, there's an organized campaign led, by various bodies and organizations to basically insist that anti-Semitism is not what we understand, what everyone understands anti-Semitism to have been. In other words, hatred and prejudice against Jews, but an opposition to the state of Israel's policies, its apartheid, its ideology of colonial Zionism. And so what's happened in effect is that you can be, the amazing thing is that you have right-wing people who are vehemently anti-Jewish and of course anti-Muslim and anti-Arab and anti-Black and anti-everything. And yet they're okay, they're given a pass because they're pro-Israel. So the where you stand on Israel's apartheid has become sort of the definition of whether one is or isn't an anti-Semite. And that is absurd because, you can't truly be against anti-Jewish, you can't be against anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Semitism, and not also be against anti-Palestinian hatred and anti-Arab hatred and anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Black hatred, which is precisely why we see across college campuses in this country, and in fact around the world, you see a coalition of people, especially younger people, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, progressive Jewish, Black, white, across the board. You have this extraordinary coalition of people who are mobilizing for justice. And that really is the most heartening thing. In terms of the question of supremacy, yes, there's a lot of parallels with white supremacy. I mean, apartheid is the most obvious thing. Every human rights organization has said that what Israel is doing in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, inside Israel, is apartheid. And that's exactly tied to this history of white supremacy. But the difference, I think, Emma, the difficulty is that unlike apartheid, and I've had this discussion with my brothers on the Makdisi Street podcast, but the difficulty is that unlike apartheid South Africa, you have many people, including colleagues of mine, who are incredibly smart, sensitive people who still support the state of Israel. They refuse to understand what Israel does to the Palestinians, and so you have that. It's a complicated thing in that sense. But I keep pointing out to them that when Palestinians and allies, including progressive Jewish anti-Zionists, as well as people of faith and good conscience around the world, organize against Zionism, they are in effect doing exactly what people did in fighting against apartheid South Africa, against the Jim Crow South in this country. In other words, you're fighting against a system of apartheid, you're not fighting against people. And ultimately, the argument is that we want to have a liberated Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it, where everyone is equal. But you can't have equality and have an ethno-religious nationalist state. It just simply does not work.
It's incompatible. And I think, it's often, I've had very similar conversations, obviously, with people who are liberal on everything except Palestinian rights. And it's often phrased as, well, you have to see my side. There's two sides to this. There's one side and there's another side. And it's framed as a religious conflict. And that is fundamentally wrong based on everything we've talked about. It's about colonialism. It's about imperialism. But I think there's also a bigotry that underlines that as well, which is this notion, and you'll hear it a lot, like Israel represents the cosmopolitan West. It represents the ideals of liberalism, of gay rights. You'll hear, even though gay marriage I don't think is legal in Israel. It represents women's rights, and it's and on the other side there's the barbarism of the Palestinians. And that is, I feel, that bigotry that does underlie that Zionism, right? Racist tropes about Arab people that is inherent to that ideology.
Yeah, I mean, there's an erasure of Palestinian history and humanity. And of course, there's an erasure of the fact that Palestine was and remains a multicultural, multi-religious place. And the reality is that, of course, Zionism emerged in Europe. I mean, I can't stress this point enough, because it did not emerge among Jewish communities, ancient indigenous Jewish communities in the Middle East. And this is a point that every Zionist sort of apologist has to sort of avoid, because it's so obvious in terms of, it's not about being Jewish, it's about being Zionist and about imposing the Zionist project on people in the Middle East with, all, as you said, all these tropes of, if you read Weitzman, if you go back and you read, and again, these are all available, you read Weitzman's letters, and he's one of the leaders of the Zionist movement in the early 20th century. Read his letters to Balfour. They're kind of shocking, what he says about Arabs. And what he says about sort of Eastern Jews. They're shockingly racist. In fact, you would say they're anti-Semitic if you just switch the word Arab and Jew. It's truly shocking. And read what Israeli historians like Benny Morris, what they say in interviews in 2004. Again, shocking racism. See what the Israelis today are saying. It's absolutely unconscionable what so many Israelis, I mean, when I say most Israelis, there are, of course, exceptions. And so, yeah, that's the history we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with this legacy of denial, and all these tropes that get used. They're all, like, in other words, pinkwashing and so on and so forth. These are all there to cover up a basic reality that the vast majority of the world today sees. And the South African case at the ICJ, I think, lays out in crystal clear language that this is an unconscionable state of affairs. No people should be subjected to what the Palestinians are being subjected to. And honestly, the history of the Middle East is crystal clear. There is a profound history of religious coexistence and of secular coexistence as well, with all the ups and downs and all the variations that any good historian would tell you are, part of that history. On the other hand, what you have today is an ethno-religious nationalist state that's insisting on its right to sort of carry out genocide. They don't call it a genocide, but of course that is exactly what's happening in the name of sustaining this kind of state project.
Yeah, if you could just go even further in addressing how defenders often of Israel will say that there has been religious turmoil in the region for thousands and thousands of years. This is in some way a continuation of it. Yeah, if you could just expand on that.
It's absurd. I mean, the historical record is there. I mean, historians, there's no such thing as a perfect history. And every history of coexistence is also a history of sectarianism. And every history of sectarianism is also a history of coexistence. In other words, wherever you have pluralism, you're going to have inevitably tensions. That's the same in America. It's the same in Europe. It's the same in India. It's the same in any society where there is pluralism. And so too in the Ottoman Empire, and so too in the Islamic world, and so too in the Arab world. No surprise there. The point, of course, is that why is it that in Europe, despite the history of fanatical religious violence between Protestants and Catholics, the horrific sort of history of anti-Jewish anti-Semitism in Europe, in America, the history of racism that goes on, as you know, and as you guys have talked about on your show many times, the history of racism that's with us until now, the history of the obliteration of indigenous populations, all these things that take place in the West, somehow we say, okay, these are terrible things that have happened, yet we can still be multicultural, we can still believe in equality, we can believe in secular citizenship and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the Middle East, where there's a history, a much more profound history of religious coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, somehow we're told, oh, no, in the Middle East, despite this history, no, these people are barbarians, they're sectarian, they're always fighting. It's absurd. It's completely untrue. And, I challenge anyone to go back and look at the history. And that's why I wrote this book, Age of Coexistence, precisely to point out that the history, in fact, is infinitely more positive. Without whitewashing the history, infinitely more positive. And the real issue is that colonial Zionism and European racism in the Mandate period in the early 20th century came in and divided up this region, the Middle East, the Arab East, into various bits and pieces to suit European imperial interests and, of course, to suit the Zionists. And they destroyed Palestine, and look what's happened to Syria, look what's happened to Lebanon, look what's happened to Iraq. I mean, it's a catastrophe, honestly.
Yeah, Professor, I wasn't able to find it, but I saw a bit of pro-Israel propaganda responding to the genocide charge, and it pointed to populations of Jews in Arab countries and how that went down following the foundation of Israel. And I think, as you guys sort of mentioned earlier, that's because of the rise of nationalism that project engendered in the region, and it actually shows that Jews lived in those Arab countries prior to the state, as you say, in an age of coexistence.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of these Zionist arguments that's again on the face of it absurd, because what happened, of course, to the Arab Jews or Jews who lived in the Arab world, however you want to describe these people, is of course terrible. What happened after 1948 in terms of in Iraq and Yemen and other places was a horrific thing. But of course, it doesn't excuse the Nakba of 1948, and second, as you point out, it's tied to the Nakba. In other words, the only reason these are two sides of the same catastrophe, and so I refuse anyone who says it's either this or that. Both are aspects of the same terrible ethno-religious nationalist project that came in and destroyed the history of coexistence in our part of the world, and that doesn't excuse the people who reacted negatively, but that's what I would say in terms of a response to that particular piece of propaganda. But again, what I do point out in the book, in Age of Coexistence, is that there were massacres of Christians in the 19th century, in Damascus in particular, in 1860. And there was no Jewish question in the Middle East. I mean, that's important, again, for your listeners and viewers to know. There was no Jewish question in the Middle East. There was in Europe, of course, because of anti-Semitism. But in the Middle East, the Jews were not the minority that were singled out in the 19th century. The Armenians were eventually, and that's why there's an Armenian genocide that takes place. But there wasn't a Jewish question as such. And the interesting thing is that there were massacres of Christians, for example, in Damascus in 1860. But what you find is that Christian Arabs were the ones who were at the forefront of elaborating an ecumenical, which just means like a culture that transcends religious difference into a unifying political, social sort of identity of being Arab in the 19th and early 20th century. All this happened, and so when the Nakba occurs in 1948, and there was, for example, an attack on Jews in Iraq, even before the Nakba in 1941, in the Farhud of 1941. So there was an attack on Jews in Baghdad, and it was a terrible event. But there's no reason why Iraqi Jews, like Ave Shleim's family that you mentioned, Emma, there's no reason why Iraqi Jews couldn't have been, and would have been, in fact, in a different universe, would have been at the forefront of elaborating a new kind of Iraq. But I think Zionism, honestly, Zionism's whole premise is that you cannot be an Arab Jew. You simply cannot be. You're either Arab or Jewish. Remember, there was no such thing as an Arab-Jewish conflict before the arrival of Zionism in Palestine, in the Arab East. There was no such thing. There's no reason why one could be a Christian Arab, a Muslim Arab, and not be a Jewish Arab. There's absolutely no reason for that, were it not for Zionism.
Right. I mean, you see, there's even denial I saw from, I think it was like the mayor of Jerusalem, that there even are Christians in Gaza. Because, yeah, I mean that goes so deep. Arab equals Muslim equals barbarian. Last question before we let you go, Ussama. I just wanted to bring it back to the ICJ, the genocide hearings opening today. As a historian, could you talk more about the significance of South Africa leading the charge in this case, and what your assessment is of this moment in history?
Well, I think it's profound. It's incredibly moving. It testifies to the spirit of post-apartheid South Africa. It points to the fact that the vast majority of the world, Emma, the vast majority of the world sides with the Palestinians and with the South African case. It's evident. And if you follow the hearings, and you've had a clip of it, and I've been watching this, it's extraordinary, the detail. We've never had a genocide committed in our time, live streamed before our eyes, where the victims are also live streaming their own sort of brutalization and victimization by the Israeli state. And the Israeli officials have been absolutely explicit in their intentions. So I think that it's profound. And if you look at the South Africans who are presenting, notice who they are. They represent the gamut of South Africa, the new South Africa, black and white, together, working together to present a case that is extraordinary. Any person of conscience should be able to say, this is wrong, this is unacceptable, this genocide should stop. And I don't know what's going to happen, of course, because as you said, it's politics in the end. in terms of the amount of pressure the US, Israel, the UK, and other European states are going to put on these judges is going to be enormous. But the reality is, and you see it everywhere, there is a generational shift, a paradigm shift taking place everywhere. Young people no longer buy the propaganda that our generation, my generation in particular, has been subjected to, and my parents' generation were subjected to. So things are changing, and the only question is how fast will things change, and how many more innocent people are going to be slaughtered before the case of South Africa, gets a fair hearing. So I hope that the ICJ will rule affirmatively just to stop this genocide. But we know that even if they do rule affirmatively, it's not going to stop necessarily, because we're talking about geopolitics.
Absolutely. At least I'm praying it can be some sort of pressure mechanism. But Ussama Makdisi, the host of the Makdisi Street podcast, professor of history at University of California, Berkeley, and the book is called Age of Coexistence, the Ecumenical Frame and Making of the Modern Arab World. We'll put a link to that in the description wherever you're listening to this. Thank you so much, Ussama. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be talking to Rune Moller Stahl about Elon Musk's fight against unions in Nordic countries. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Rune Moller Stahl, assistant professor in political economy at Copenhagen Business School, who wrote a piece in Jacobin along with Jonas Algers entitled "Tesla Has Bitten Off More Than It Can Chew by Picking a Fight with Swedish Unions." Rune, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start here, because Elon Musk's here in the U.S., SpaceX is currently challenging the constitutionality of the National Labor Relations Board's court system, which is the place where unions, workers can get recourse against their employers. Like, that's his fight against unions here in the U.S. But as you write, he's fighting unions in Nordic countries as well. In Sweden, in particular, in this case, workers have been striking there. If you could explain to the audience what's been happening since October, or for the last few months, in Sweden's Tesla workshops.
Yeah, we've had the strike since October. It's in the phase a relatively minor strike. It's 150 mechanics in the workshops, like the service stations in Sweden. There's no Tesla production in Sweden, so in that way it's minor. But Tesla has, for a number of years, refused to sign a collective agreement with the Swedish union. So the Swedish union, the metal workers union, EmMajority, has started this conflict, and they've been in conflict since October. It has spread in December, especially. We saw a number of unions from the other Nordic countries join in. So you have the transport unions in Denmark, Norway, Finland, dock workers, and so on. They're refusing to load Teslas off the ships in Esbjerg and these sort of things. And of course, then basically what makes this pretty a pretty drastic conflict compared to probably what you're used to in the U.S. context is that Nordic unions, when there's no collective agreement, you can basically do a sympathy conflict. This means that it's not only the metal workers who are in conflict against Tesla at the moment, but it's basically the entire unionized workforce in Sweden. So there's no, the transport workers won't ship Teslas. No one's picking up their garbage. If they have electrical problem, the electricians won't come. They can't get anything mailed. They tried to sue the Swedish Postal Service in order to make them ship the number plates, but they lost that one. So it's a pretty drastic conflict in that way. The unions are basically able to, in these situations when there's no collective agreement, so they're not bound by labor law, they can shut down, a firm completely.
It's enviable because unions in the United States, do not necessarily have that density and those abilities just statutorily. I guess if you don't mind expanding a bit more on the differences between U.S. labor unions, law over here, and Nordic and Swedish labor unions, because I know that there are very high, at least, especially relative to the United States, percentages in terms of density for these labor unions.
Yeah, it's in all of the Nordic countries in the 60s, 70s percent. Like it's different from each sector. Industries generally quite well organized. I think the metal workers have around 80%. Some of the other service sectors are a bit less. We've had the same development as in the US, where the highest levels of organization now is in the public sector unions, nurses, teachers, these sort of professions. There's also been a tendency in the last decades to see more union militancy in the public sector. Both in Sweden and Denmark, we've seen the biggest strikes in public sector. In public sector areas, but this is the private sector. There's, I guess, like when it comes to the legal framework, a lot of this quite unique from the Nordic countries is not regulated by law, but by different sets of collective agreements. So there's no legal minimum wage. That's negotiated by unions with the employers and centralized collective negotiations, like holiday, parental leave, sick leave, all of these sort of things. There might be in some areas like a very basic floor set by law, but basically everything is negotiated through these centralized negotiations. That's also why it's important to have even like a small workplace like Tesla's operations in Sweden to get them organized, because it's you risk undermining the entire system if a powerful company moves in and gets a foothold of non-organization in these labor markets. Like the floor is pretty low if you're not organized, because it's basically all dependent on the unions being able to go in and get employers to sign on to collective agreements.
This is also notable because I hadn't realized until reading your piece that the strength historically of these unions in Nordic countries is quite well documented, and you laid it out very well. But that union density is down in Sweden since. Sorry.
Yeah. No. It's down, and it's been a consistent trend since at least the 90s in all of the.
So yeah, my question was, how did that begin? Was that kind of an era of neoliberalism?
Yeah, basically, we've sort of had the same development as everywhere else. It's a bit later in most Nordic countries, where you started in the early 80s. I think Denmark probably started in the mid 80s. Sweden only they tried to sort of run full employment Keynesian policies until they had a big crisis in the early 90s. But it's basically the same story as over there, and the unions have steadily been losing ground in 30 years. There's also again, we still have some of the highest levels of organization, I think, in the world. There are a few other places in Europe that have like comparative levels, but I think like some of the most powerful unions in the world. But I think it's also like important not to romanticize this. Like the unions are very moderate in a Scandinavian context. We don't have the same sort of union militancy that you might see in places like France, Belgium, or other places. The amount of strike days it's still bigger than, for instance, in the US, but it's not very high, and it's been falling. Sweden especially has had very few large labor conflicts in the recent decade.
So yes, not to romanticize, but it seems the union density is much higher than, say, in the U.S. But from what I'm hearing you say, because the unions in Nordic countries determine the minimum wage through collective bargaining, they are a bit more institutionalized.
A lot more institutionalized. Yeah. It's they have a lot of power, basically, no matter what. Even if you'd lose your entire organization on the ground, you'd still have the annual negotiations and these sort of things. Of course, it's based on decades, even a century of class power, but it still means that a lot of that power, as it stands now, is not tied to direct, shop floor labor action, but more to this sort of large institutionalized system of negotiation. That's also why a conflict like with Tesla is a bit unusual, because most employers in the Nordic countries, they choose to sign collective agreements. So you have, like, if you look at the coverage of collective agreements, it's bigger than the actual unionization rate would otherwise tell you, because a lot of employers simply choose to sign these agreements, to sign up to them, because if you're not in a collective agreement, you can basically face this sort of conflict. Whereas if you are under a collective agreement, the unions can't do any sort of of labor conflict. You're immune to strikes. The unions are sort of obliged to keep the peace, and even to sort of clamp down on local wildcat strikes. So it's, in that way, it's a system of industrial peace with a bigger level of union power, but still. It's there's a reason why most employers in the Nordics, even multinationals, choose to sign collective agreements. Like, I think McDonald's tried it in Denmark in the 80s, Toys R Us in Sweden, and they all ended up signing, because otherwise you face this sympathy conflict, and it is sort of the nuclear weapon in the union arsenal, because it's just so powerful when you can shut down all operations of a company.
So I guess that brings us to now, where some of these sympathy strikes are beginning for the 150-ish Tesla Swedish workers that are striking. What's happening on that front?
Again, it's mostly like the transport workers, the dock workers in the other Scandinavian countries that has signed on, refusing to ship Tesla cars, otherwise work with Tesla. You've also seen sell-offs of Tesla stock from the big pension funds that are partly union controlled. They're selling off the stock there. I'm not sure that has a big impact. But the the Swedish Metal Workers Union, the EmMetall, has a big war chest. I think it's almost $1 billion. They haven't struck for a long time. The unions are also like, because they build up these strike funds that are very, very big. They're able to pay the members full wages, sometimes even more than full wages when they strike. So they won't run out of money. And yeah, the question is what's going to happen now. Is so far there's been no signs of either the unions backing down or Tesla entering into any sort of negotiation. It's a good question. The big thing is, of course, will this spread? Will this give inspiration to Tesla workers in other places? The big thing here is the so-called Gigafactory near Berlin that's being constructed at the moment. Once it's finished, there'll be 10,000, 12,000 workers there. It'll be like the main operation in Europe. The IG Metall, the German metal workers union, is also very powerful, but so far there's been no attempt at unionizing the Tesla factory there. So the big question is, will the spread to Germany and to sort of the core of the Tesla production system? Will it spread to the US? I just saw that the UAW had done some saber rattling, and Tesla put up wages automatically. So it's I think that's more of the question. Also, what. It's a bit unpredictable what Tesla would do. I think the sensible thing would be to just sign this contract. It's not that expensive.
Elon Musk's not the most sensible guy, is what I think the world is starting to figure out. He's clearly ideologically opposed to unions.
Oh yeah. He was. I think he called it insane and called sort of unions these sort of lords of I'm not sure who the
lords and peasants system, but because unlike those lord and peasants plants at Ford and the other unionized plants in the U.S., Tesla lets the executives and the workers ride in the same elevator.
Utopia.
So checkmate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That would never happen in Europe or in Sweden. Yeah.
So anyway, is he screwed, Elon? That's what I want to hear from this. Is he in trouble a little bit here? As
if history is our guide, then he'll be in trouble. And,
okay, good.
They might choose to exit the Scandinavian markets. For instance, in Denmark, Uber did that. Basically, from a legal side, they couldn't treat their drivers as though they weren't workers. Then they chose, instead of actually giving sick leave and a decent pay, they chose just to close operations in Denmark. They might choose to do that, but that even though the Nordic countries are small, they're still quite big markets. I think Norway especially is the third largest market after the UK and in Germany. In absolute numbers, they buy a lot of Teslas in Norway. Sweden's also big, Denmark to a certain extent. So it's not completely insubstantial. But if you can't run an operation, it'll be harder to sell to the Nordic market. So again, all economic rationality would say that Tesla and Elon would sign an agreement. But again, as you said, it might be an ideological struggle. It also might be the sort of fear of inspiration for Tesla workers in other countries. So in that way, it's probably a bit more unpredictable than if this was, a more normal company.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Rune Moller Stahl, assistant professor in political economy at Copenhagen Business School. You can read the piece in Jacobin, co-written with Jonas Algers. Tesla has bitten off more than it can chew by picking a fight with Swedish unions. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up the free hour, the first hour of this program, head into the fun half, where we will take your calls We will read your IMs.
We might get value-tained.
I don't know what the hell that means.
Wow. Someone's not a RM Brown
Oh.
or PBD listener.
Oh.
Or doesn't watch PBD via RM Brown.
You know, I don't. I don't watch PBD via anything, except when I'm forced to. But, you know.
Well, you're going to be forced to, so.
You have a higher pain tolerance than I do, I think. I'm looking forward to making fun of that clip, though. I got a little preview from you at the start of the show.
It's a great clip. It's PBD talking about yoga pants and founding fathers.
Ah. I mean, two related thoughts.
You can imagine George Washington prancing around.
Those tights are kind of like yoga pants.
Yeah, yoga pants of Virginia.
Many people are saying. On ESPN today, we will be joined by
what's going on
Matt
there? Oh, yeah,
okay. We're going to have some fun.
It'd be nice if the Timberwolves were better than 5-5 in the last 10, but I guess Emma has to wait until that happens.
The Knicks are undefeated since the OG Anunoby trade, so I might actually try to talk a little basketball. And then I will talk football to Matt. We'll see how that goes. But some fun news items we'll also get to is Aaron Rodgers having a meltdown. And I think both of us will be able to comment on that quite effectively.
And Harbaugh is good, apparently.
Yeah, there's some wrinkles to it. I mean, he's we'll get into that. Yeah, Harbaugh.
Because Sam put that in the Slack the other day, and I'm like, well, I think we might need to save this for Emma because
there's more context to Harbaugh saying that.
Right. Okay, that's what I figured because I haven't previously decoded him as good guy.
No. He's spoken at anti-abortion rallies and things like that. But I mean, even he basically understands players need to get paid in college football and basketball for that matter. So we'll be talking about that today at 4 p.m. Eastern. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had Sudip Bhattacharya on to talk about Southeast Asian particularly, but Asian. Dave Rubin's basically making a play to do a new reactionary realignment for racism where it's white people, Jews, and Asians. And so we dug deep into sort of some identity politics issues, including actually they've gotten into a sports issue with the new or proposed Sixers stadium, which they want to put in Chinatown, which I don't know if you've been to Chinatown in Philly, but it's small already. Yeah. I don't know how
Philly's small already. All the neighborhoods are small.
But anyways, we had a good conversation with Sudeep, who's a really smart guy, last Tuesday. So check that out. I'm talking with Rob Rousseau about being canceled by Elon. Elon's Twitter for patrons, patreon.com/reckoning on Sunday. And Brandon, you are here.
Whoa, Brandon's here.
You're muted though.
And
Brandon.
You're muted. Yeah, you gotta unmute yourself. If you could just.
I was being polite.
Nah, wrong.
And
You're
that's
not
the wrong
connected to your
microphone.
mic, so go to your settings. Figure this shit out. We don't have Binder today, everybody. So check out Doomed and Scam Economy.
Oh no, Binder.
He is away at that.
We don't need
event,
to, I guess. Okay,
covering it.
Oh, CES.
Yes, we hear you better now. Right.
Binder,
okay.
Bring me home a RTX 4080 Super, please, Matt Binder. Sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
No, I'm gonna say
sure
bring me home a 4090. Right? Is that a thing?
Yeah, the 4090 is the best, but I guess if you could, Brandon will take the 4090. I'll take the 4080 Super.
Yeah.
What products are we talking about?
We're talking about graphics cards.
Oh, okay. My first guess would have been a video game console, but the console doesn't make sense, or some video game apparatus, but that's not
sort of right.
Okay, all right. Well,
no, I'm mining Bitcoin with mine.
I'm doing neural networks.
Oh.
No, I'm playing video games.
Okay.
Yeah.
Binder, what's your name?
Brandon,
what's happening on the discourse?
We should have something fun for you out this weekend, and then also we should be going over, and I mean actually going over once we sit down to record, which we haven't done about this yet. So knock on wood, it will happen. The ICJ trial, South Africa versus Israel. No, but seriously, the charges of genocide against Israel being litigated in the ICJ right now.
It's a pretty important historical moment, I would say.
You wouldn't know it based on the coverage it's been getting, I feel like.
You would not. We opened the show with it, and the hearings will continue tomorrow. Couldn't be more important. All right, well, check that out. Check out the discourse, and we will head into the fun half now. We'll take your calls and read your IMs. We'll keep talking about Israel. We'll also talk about Donald Trump's town hall last night, all that good stuff, and PBD fun things. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it. All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males...
Psych. Fuck them. Oh.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy! I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Back.
We are back. It is the fun half, everybody. We will be...
Getting ourselves angry.
Oh, yes.
What's more fun than that?
Before we do that, I'll just read some IMs before, I end up having a meltdown. It's like, 20% chance that'll happen. Goobermint, hey, Emma and MR crew, became a member yesterday. Woo!
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to send a thank you for all you do, raise awareness on and promote through the show. Also, if you're hungry after last night's debate, check out DeSantisPies.com. There are flavors such as apple, blueberry, cherry, and meatball. That's hilarious. I am starving. Sam has eaten all the nuts in this office, so I went and grabbed a handful of dry damn it. But one of our sponsors, nuts.com, we had so many, and he's gobbled up all the nuts.